Well, welcome again to my World of Oriental Rugs. I kind of laugh every time I look at that title because I know it sounds kind of funny, my world instead of the World of Oriental Rugs, but I'm trying to cover everything I know about Oriental rugs, but there it is. It's everything I know. And I don't know everything, so it's just my World of Oriental Rugs. Anyway, this is class 2, and we last week we looked at I told you a little bit about myself, and then we looked at the maps and origins of rugs and some of the definitions of rugs, and then we finalized it by looking at what's known as the Paisar carpet, the rug that was found that's dated to be about 500 BC. That's 2,500 years old. Tonight, we're just going to talk a little bit about the history of rugs and just some of the real early history. My forte and the thing I love to talk about the most is when we get into the lesson on the period between 1880 and 1920, or what I call the second rug renaissance. But tonight we're just going to look at the very early history and then come up through the first rug renaissance, or what we call the golden age of Oriental rugs. So let's just begin. So last week, I just briefly showed you this timeline. And tonight, this is what we're going to be concentrating, the early history up to the Safavid Dynasty. And then we will talk about the first great rug renaissance, or the golden age, or what's known as the Safavid Dynasty, 3 shahs in a row that were during the Age of Enlightenment and the Renaissance period throughout the world. And it didn't change in what was in Persia and the Persian Empire. So then next, well, actually, then between here, we're going to talk about the construction of rugs. The next 2 weeks, we're going to talk about the construction of rugs, the loom and the dyes and the wool and so on and so forth. But then we'll talk about the second great rug renaissance, and then a period I call honorable mention, which is the period between 1915 and 1985. And I put 1960, but truly it's actually probably from around 1940 to 1975. And then the third great rug renaissance is just the period that's present day and started around 1985. I know that sounds kind of funny that we can put such a exact date on it, but as we get into that lesson, you'll see that it is exactly that. It's 1985. That's when certain things fell into place and it started. But for now, let's take a look at some of the early history. So, you know, they found this Paisaric carpet to be, 500 BC, and they did those test carbon dating to get that date on it. They attributed it to Cyrus the Great. And down through the ages, we found other things that date rugs to be very early. One of the significant, well, here's another timeline for you of some of the significant finds. The Paisaric carpet, 500 BC. Then we found remnants of some Turkish rugs woven between 400 and 500 AD. And the Seljuk tribe, which is also part of Turkey, rugs from around 13th century. And then a couple, we'll talk about the Holbein rug and the Lado rug, which are actually in this whole period here. And then we get all the way through the Golden Age, or the Safavid Dynasty. And then rugs, there in the 17th and 18th century, there were also rugs from Turkey and from the Caucasus. It is not my forte, and it's not something that I'm specializing in this books. There's whole books on old rugs from the Caucasus. We briefly touch on it from here to there, and but I mainly deal mostly in Persian rugs. Not at our shop. At our shop, we sell everything, but in these lectures, I'm dealing mostly with the history of the Persian carpet. So Oriel Stein was an explorer that went to Eastern Turkestan in the 20th century, and he discovered some carpet fragments, which he dated to be about 5th or 6th century. He attributed them to Turkey, and they had around 50 knots per square inch. So obviously they weren't very finely woven. There's just fragments These are all found in museums, most of them in European museums. But these are just great examples of what probably were fabulous rugs at the time. And obviously it's just fragments, but these are all pieces that we attribute to Oriel Stein's findings, and he attributes them all to be from the Turkish area. I noted here the brown oxidation, because as we study about dyes and things, we'll find that some dyes tend to weaken the wool, and browns and blacks were one of those dyes that oxidized and caused the wool to weaken. So in the Seljuk tribes, this is interesting. In 1905, there was discovery of rugs in a mosque in Ala-ad-Din, Konya, Turkey, dated to be about 13th century. They were very loosely woven. And however, in the 13th century writing about Marco Polo, he was quoted as saying that the Seljuk rugs were some of the finest and most handsome rugs in the world. So again, Turkish rugs from the Seljuk tribes, a little later, 1200, 1250 and so on, 13th century. But this is a rug from the Seljuk tribes. Again, these can be found, I believe that one's in a museum in Istanbul, as is this one. We will show you another picture of this rug a little later on today, but these are all early pieces from the Seljuk tribes. And they made some, we date these to be 13th, 14th century, but some of them can be as late as 15th or 16th century. Now, Holbein rugs is kind of interesting because there is actually no such thing as a Holbein rug in terms of it wasn't woven in Holbein. Hans Holbein was a German artist, and he did portraits of Henry VIII and in the 16th century, so that's in the mid 1500s. And oftentimes, as artists do, they have their favorite rugs that they like to put in the background of like the rug I have behind me here. They have a favorite rug. Of course, my rug changes from time to time there, but artists have a favorite rug that they like to put in the background of their paintings. And Holbein had his favorite, and it was a rug from the Ottoman Empire or Turkey. And here's a couple examples of what we would call a Holbein carpet. So that's Henry VIII, and there's one of the Holbein carpets. And here again, here's another one, Henry VIII and someone else with the Holbein carpet there. And there's a photograph of a complete Holbein rug. Again, the same with that one. Now, Lotto rugs, it's the same thing. Lorenzo Lotto was an Italian painter, and he always used these carpets, which we, call the Lotto carpets, or sometimes they're called the bird carpets. And he did religious paintings in the early 16th century. Again, these rugs were from Ottoman Empire. And I'm telling you this because this is the history of rugs. This is what we know about rugs. So here's a couple cardinals, and there is a Lotto rug. Or again, this is a portrait of a Lotto rug. And this particular one is known as the bird carpet. You can see the little bird design in it. And if you think it's beautiful, so did Colonial Williamsburg, because actually Colonial Williamsburg copied this, had Karastan make a copy of this. And I don't know if they still sell it, but in the 80s and 90s and 2000, this was one of their big selling carpets, this and this one. These are both copies of what we would call Lotto carpets. And that's a more all over motif, and that one, not a bird run. But again, this was a rug that Colonial Williamsburg copied and sold Karastan copies of it. So they're famous rugs from the 16th century. So we've seen rugs from 500 BC, then 500 AD, then 1200, 1300. Not that there's probably wasn't rugs woven in 800 and 900, but all the way up to the 16th, 17th century. Here's another one of the Lotto carpets. And then there was another artist, Gentile Bellini, And these are actually just the three main ones. There probably were others that used a lot of rugs in their paintings as well. But Gentile Bellini was a Venetian Renaissance artist from the 15th century, and he did religious scenes. And there you see probably a rug very similar to the one right there in that painting. And so let's go back. That's the way that's some of the history that we have of the early history of rugs, and that right up until around the 1600s. So the 16th century was a very chaotic time because there was a lot of war. As you know, there's always been kind of wars and chaotic times in the Persian Empire. But it did usher in the golden age of rugs. So the golden age is attributed mostly to the Safavid Dynasty, and it's three very famous shahs. The first one to reign was Shah Ismail. But however, in 1499, when he took reign in Tabriz, shortly after that, Persian domain was attacked again by the Ottomans, the Kurds, and even the capital was overtaken, and they had to move the capital, which was then in Tabriz. They took over, and they took some of the Persian weavers back to Turkey with them. And interestingly enough, the Persian knot actually showed up in some of the Turkish weaving, which we'll talk about knots in a week or two, and it doesn't really matter that much whether it's a Turkish knot or a Persian knot. But anyway, shortly after that, Ismail took back the capital of Tabriz, but then he moved the capital to Kazvin, and then later all the way to inland to Isfahan. But the Safavid dynasty, there was peace in the land. It was a time of enlightenment and Renaissance and the restoring of the arts. And these shahs were as much into it as the artists in Europe and all of the other, we read so much in terms of music and the great creators of music, the great creators of art. And so it took place in the Persian Empire too. So the three famous shahs were Shah Ismail, who reigned from 1499 to 1524, Shah Taspa, who reigned from 1524 to 1576, and then Shah Abbas, who is probably my favorite because he actually designed some rugs, and I can't say I have favorites. I didn't know any of them, but he's the most familiar of them. Let's say it like that. He reigned from 1587 to 1629. And they did these great garden designs. They actually built looms in their palaces, and they oversaw the weaving of rugs. As I said, Shah Abbas actually designed some rugs himself. So the great designers of the Golden Age were mostly the three shahs, but there were some other ones as well, the famed Maskud from Kashan, and the inspirations of the artists of the day. And many of these artists were commissioned by the shahs to weave rugs and weave beautiful things. And what we're going to do now is show you a few of the great rugs from the Safavid dynasty. Probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, is what's known as the mosque artable carpet. It wasn't actually woven in artable, it was woven for a mosque in artable. The so-called artable carpet has 17 by 34 with 340 knots per square inch. It's 17 wide by 34 feet long. 340 knots per square inch means it has over 33 million knots. It's on display in the Victoria Albert Museum in London. And it was woven by Maskud of Kashan. And there's a photograph of the mosque artable carpet. It's one of the most unimaginable things. It's kind of like the Grand Canyon. When my wife and I visited Victoria Albert Museum years ago, and it was hanging on a wall then, and they had one long bench about 20 feet back from it, and you just sat on that bench and just looked at it. The great design, the hanging lanterns, and this portrays the center of a mosque. If you look straight up and to the dome of the mosque with all the lanterns hanging, and then a few bigger lanterns. And here's the signature of the weaver and who it's woven for, and so on. And just a fabulous rug. I have one more slide of it. This is the way they have it displayed now at the Victoria Albert Museum. But let's look at a few other rugs from that from the Safavid Dynasty. So in 2010, in 2010, this rug sold in New York for $9.6 million. It broke every record there ever was for an Oriental rug. It's a 17th century Persian kerman with an all-over design, a beautiful palmette motif in it. It's kind of interesting because around the turn, around 2000 or 2001, 2002, this rug sold at an auction at one of those side street auctions in New York for $180,000. And I know that because I know some people that were at that auction, one of whom bid on it up to $100,000, and then he dropped out, but it sold for $180,000. So then whoever bought it, and I don't know who it was, then sort of marketed it and presented it and got several people very, very interested. And when it went up for sale in Sotheby's in 2010, it sold for $9.6 million. Not all of our rugs are that expensive. Anyway, if you think that's expensive, take a look at this one. So this one sold in 2013. And I'm sorry, let me just go back one slide there. $33.7 million. It's a 17th century Persian kerman with the sickle, leaf, vine, and palmette motif. Here's a little interesting tidbits about it. It was an ancient Persian rug once owned by American billionaire, broke every record, selling for $33.7 million, which is 3 times the previous record sold. Exquisite hand-woven rug with more than 360 years old. And it was bought in the early 1900s by William Clark in Paris. And then the carpet was sold at Sotheby's auction house in New York City to raise money for the DC Museum. The price for the sickle leaf carpet was more than 3 times the previous auction record. And it was sold to an anonymous telephone bidder. So we don't know actually who bought it, but unbelievable. So here, now I'm just taking some photographs from some museums, the Metropolitan and Victoria and Albert, just to give you some examples of some of these great pieces. Frequently, they would use wool and metal thread, and this is a prayer design. A prayer design simply means that this is arched. It should be turned sideways, and you see the motif a little bit better, but there's a niche at the top of it, and then the design just comes straight down. And frequently they use these metal threads and metal threads, gold metallic threads, and silver metallic threads, and a lot of silk were in these rugs. So this is attributed to the Safavid Dynasty. Here's another Isfahan from the Safavid Dynasty. There's another. Isfahan did a lot with, you see these little cloud bands in here? They did a lot with those cloud band motif. There it is again there, the cloud band motif. And they did a lot of hanging lanterns that you see at both ends of this one. So there's a Shah Abbas motif, a very early Kashan. And as I said, Shah Abbas actually designed this carpet. So he was the one that designed this medallion like this with the 2 beautiful palmettes coming out of both ends. We call them anchors, but they're actually a type of palm that came out of the both ends. And then they had beautiful vases and flowers in the corners. This was all designed by Shah Abbas, but that's a Kashan carpet from the Safavid Dynasty. There's another piece from the Safavid Dynasty. There's a gorgeous, what we call the Tree of Life rug. Now, here's something the next few slides will have. You'll frequently see portraits of the famous Shahs and I don't know which shawl is which here, but each one, if you look closely, you'll see that there's signatures or the name of the, not signatures, but the name of the shawl is in the little cartouche where it is. But they frequently did carpets with beautiful animals and a lot of silk embroidery and stuff like that. Here's another one with the hunt scene and literally the lion jumping on top of a deer and beautiful things like this. This is a Isfahan carpet. You know, again, attributed to Kashan, silk, metal, warp, thread, you know, beautifully woven rugs from the Safavid Dynasty. These are all at the Metropolitan. Here's another thing they like to do. So there's the shawls in the border. You see here and here and here and here. But another thing they loved to do was garden scenes and scenes with angels and things like this, beautiful romantic things. Remember, this was the Romantic era. This was the Renaissance. And so this is what they portrayed in their rugs at the time. Again, there you go with angels and I guess, I don't know if they call them saints or whatever, but then again, here in the corners, probably someone very famous. This is a beautiful Kerman rug from the Safavid Dynasty. This is a real famous Pahlavi Shah. It's a I can't remember the name. It's a famous carpet in that it depicted many of the Shahs. This one in the middle, he had the big mustache like that. And this was Shah Abbas. But there are many times that even in the 1890, 1910, 1920, I have seen copies of this rug. This is a Kerman rug from the Safavid Dynasty depicting all the famous Shahs and famous people from the Persian Empire. So rugs from, so as I mentioned in that timeline, there were also some rugs from the Ottoman Empire and the Caucasus. And let's just take a look at a few of them just to get an example of some of those. While it's not my specialty, although it's funny because here I show you an Ushak, and today in modern times, this is one of decorators' favorite rugs. However, not that kind. They buy Ushaks that are real soft, real pale colors. But back in the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, this is what an old Ushak looked like. I'll show you a picture, but we visited a museum in Istanbul where they had just some of the most beautiful old Milas prayer rugs and Konya prayer rugs, rugs from Turkey that were just unbelievable rugs. So that's an Ushak, sometimes spelled with the U instead of the OU. There's another typical sort of Ushak rug. Here's a Milas or Kula, probably Kula prayer rug with the beautiful, there's the arch like that, and then, you know, it's no center medallion or anything because it's a prayer arch, a prayer design. In olden times, they used them. And by the 20th century, they made just copies that they called prayer rugs, you know, but they weren't actually used for prayer. It was more like a souvenir type of thing. Actually, nowadays, if you ask someone in Persia for a prayer rug would simply be any real small mat, little 2x3 mat that they could roll up real tight and take with them to work or wherever they go during the day, so that when it was the hour of prayer, they could roll out their mat and pray. So this is what was known as a family prayer rug, and sometimes you'd see as many as maybe 8 or 10 of these designs in one long carpet, and it would be exactly that, a family prayer rug. Here's a photograph I took in the Istanbul Museum, and you can see all of this is an old Kula, and that's probably Kula. This is probably Milas. That looks more like Kayseri with the lighter colors, but these are just fabulous rugs, unbelievable, beautiful rugs. This is from Central Turkey. Now, again, remember, these are pieces that are 17th century and 18th century. Most of them are 16th and 17th century. A lot of rugs, especially with these Turkish rugs, I find every now and then pieces that are 1880, 1890, but I'm thinking, I wonder if this is one of the 1690 rugs, but probably it's not. I wish it was. One of the more famous rugs from Uşak is what was known as the Star Uşak, and they did a lot of that in the late 1500s and early 1600s. And there's another Star Uşak. Another very famous, this rug is an Ottoman animal carpet, but this is that rug that I showed you that during the Seljuk period in the 14th and 15th and 16th century. So this is actually probably a 16th century Seljuk or Ottoman animal carpet. This was another rug that was very famous from the Caucasus, known as the dragon carpet. And they did a lot of these with this lattice motif and these dragons inside. And actually, if it was clear, you could notice fire coming out of its mouth. I have another photograph of one here. And these are very famous carpets. I actually bought a copy of a dragon carpet. I was doing a show in Houston, Texas, and it wasn't a good show, and I needed to make some money somehow or another. And this lady came in the last day and showed me a photograph of this rug, and I thought it was a real dragon carpet. And I drove about 500 miles on Monday so that I had to get there by 4 o'clock so that I could look at this rug. And it wasn't near as old as I thought. And actually it was an Indian rug made in Agra. Agra housed some of the largest prisons in that area. And a lot of Persian prisoners went there. And so what they did, instead of making license plates, they made Oriental rugs. And it was a copy of a dragon carpet. I didn't wind up buying it. I stopped at an Army Navy store, bought a duffel bag, and I stuffed it in the duffel bag and checked it in as a piece of luggage and brought it home with me. And did make a little bit of money, but not much. It wasn't, a 17th century. There's a 16th century dragon carpet. Again, these are fabulous pieces. Colonial Williamsburg owns a couple pieces like this. They also own a bird carpet, the Holbein carpet and a Lotto carpet. And speaking of Colonial Williamsburg, this is a book that was written by Mildred Lanier. She was the textile curator back in the 70s, I believe. And I think this book was published around 1980 or so. And but in it, she talks about floor coverings from in Williamsburg. And while a lot of it talks about painted cloths and the other things that they did for floor coverings, there is a section that she deals with just the old carpets from the Safavid Dynasty and from Turkey and from the Ottoman Empire. So it's a good reference to see some of those. And most of those rugs Colonial Williamsburg owns. Every now and then we, we haven't done it for 2 years because of COVID, but I'm hoping that we do it again, actually, even this fall. We organize a little tour. And I'm friends with the curator now at the Textile Museum, and she allows 10 of us to go back into one of the vaulted rooms, and they open up about 10 of these fabulous rugs from the 17th century. And it's such a treat. For me, it's like candy in a candy store. It's such a treat to look at those rugs. But I believe that's it for today. There's just one of my favorite portraits. Actually, I don't even know where this painting is, but I know it's a very famous painting. But I just love, just the betrayal of the market in Tehran or in Isfahan or something, and the beautiful rug draped over the over the banister, and just the gorgeous, the way it must have been back then. Of course, I'm sure they were haggling just like people haggle today, but it's just kind of interesting. Well, I hope we Gave you a little bit of information on the history of rugs. As I said, it's not my biggest forte, so I kind of went through it a little quickly, but I'm excited about the next 2 weeks when we talk about the construction. We'll show you a loom, and we'll show you how they treat the wool, how they make the dyes, how they tie the knots, and hopefully you will learn something from all of it. And then in 3 weeks, we'll talk about the second great rug renaissance, which is the period from 1880 to 1920. I hope this was informative to you, and I'll see you again and with our next show.